5:47 a.m., before the storm. The thermometer outside Alexei Popov's frost-crusted window read -53 degrees Celsius. He didn't flinch at the number. He had stopped flinching at numbers like that when he was 7 years old, the winter his father had taken him on his first reindeer hunt, and the cold had bitten so deeply into his fingers that he had cried, not from the pain, but from the embarrassment of crying in front of his father. His father had not laughed. He had simply wrapped Alexei's hands in the fur of his own coat and said, "The cold is not your enemy, boy. Panic is." That lesson had kept Alexei alive for 61 years in Oymyakon, a village so remote, so brutally cold, that the rest of the world spoke of it in the same breath as the moon. A place where exhaled breath froze before it could drift away, where cars were left running all night because engines, once dead in this cold, might never wake again. Where eyelashes turned to ice crystals in the time it took to walk from one door to another. Where the ink in pens froze, batteries died within minutes of exposure to open air, and the ground beneath their feet had not thawed in thousands of years. Oymyakon, Republic of Sakha, Russia, the coldest permanently inhabited settlement on Earth. And today, according to the crackling radio signal that barely cut through the static, a blizzard was coming. Alexei dressed in the dark, layering with the practiced efficiency of a man who understood that clothing here was not fashion, it was survival engineering. First, the thin thermal underlayer against skin. Then wool. Then the heavy reindeer skin coat his wife Nadia had sewn for him 12 winters ago, the same coat he had refused to replace despite her protests that it was growing thin at the elbows. Over his boots went a second pair of boots, unti, traditional Yakut footwear made from horse or reindeer hide, the hair left on to trap warmth. A fur hat that covered not just his head but the sides of his face. A scarf wound 3 times around, leaving only a slit for his eyes. He looked, standing in the dim orange glow of the woodstove, like a man preparing not for a day of work but for war. Because in Oymyakon, every winter day was war. 7:15 a.m., the village wakes. By the time Alexei stepped outside, the village was stirring in the way villages this cold always stirred, slowly, deliberately, without any wasted motion. The sky to the east held a pale bruise of approaching dawn, though in January, dawn here was little more than a suggestion. Full darkness lasted until nearly 10 in the morning. True sunlight, the kind that offered warmth, was a memory from another season. Oymyakon had perhaps 500 souls. It had one school, one small shop, a community hall, and a monument, a large thermometer pole erected to commemorate the record low temperature of -71.2 degrees Celsius recorded here in 1924. Tourists came in summer, sometimes, curious to stand at the edge of the world's cold heart and take photographs. But in January, no tourists came. No one came who didn't have to. The village's main street, if you could call it that, was a packed dirt road that had been frozen solid since October and would not soften until May. Children were already being bundled out of homes by mothers who moved with brisk, no-nonsense efficiency, checking scarves, checking gloves, checking that no strip of skin was exposed to the morning air. The school did not close until temperatures dropped below -55. Today was -53. The children would go to school. Old Vera from 3 houses down was already at work outside, breaking the fresh ice that had formed overnight in the water barrel by her door. She was 74 years old, missing 2 fingers on her left hand from a frostbite incident decades past, and she moved through the cold the way fish moved through water, as if it were simply the medium of her existence, unremarkable and total. "Storm coming," she said to Alexei without looking up from her work. "I heard," he replied. "Bad one, they say." She finally looked up, her dark Yakut eyes sharp beneath the brim of her enormous fur hat. "You check your cattle. Going now." She nodded and returned to her work. This was conversation in Oymyakon in January. Efficient, purposeful, no words spent on what didn't matter. 9 a.m., the cattle. Behind Alexei's house stood a barn that was, in some ways, more carefully maintained than the house itself. It housed 11 horses and 4 cows, Yakutian cattle, a breed that had evolved over centuries specifically for this climate, their coats thick and shaggy as bears, their temperaments as stoic as the people who tended them. In temperatures that would kill most livestock within hours, these animals survived. Not thrived, perhaps, but survived, which in Oymyakon was its own form of triumph. Alexei spent 2 hours in the barn, checking water troughs, which had to be heated to prevent freezing, spreading fresh hay, examining hooves and hides for signs of the frostbite that could creep into even barn-kept animals when temperatures dropped this low. The barn itself was warm by comparison to the outside, perhaps -15 in the coldest corners, heated by the combined body warmth of the animals and a small iron stove in the corner that burned continuously from October through April. He worked quietly. The horses shifted and blew warm clouds of breath into the dim air. The cows regarded him with large, patient eyes. There was a kind of peace in this work, a rhythm as old as the settlement itself. The Yakut people had kept horses and cattle for generations in this impossible place, had built an entire food culture around them. Horsemeat and beef were dietary staples here, rich with the fat calories that bodies demanded to generate heat in such cold. Fish from the frozen Indigirka River. Reindeer. Foraged berries preserved from summer. The land gave what it gave, and it gave it locked beneath ice, and you learned to take it anyway. His phone buzzed in his inner coat pocket. He kept it there, close to his body, because phones left in the cold died within minutes. His daughter Masha, calling from Yakutsk, the regional capital, where she had moved after university and built a different kind of life. "Papa, I heard about the blizzard. Are you prepared?" "Always prepared," he told her. "I worry." "You always worry. That's your job." A pause. Then her voice, softer. "Is Mama managing the stove all right? Your mother could manage a nuclear reactor in a blizzard and still have dinner ready by 6. Masha laughed. It was a good sound. He stood there in the barn, holding the phone warm against his ear, listening to his daughter laugh from 400 kilometers away, while outside the first fingers of wind began to scratch at the barn walls. 12:30 p.m. The blizzard arrives. It did not creep in. It descended. One moment the air was still and crystalline and bitter but manageable. The next, a wall of white wind hit the village like something alive and furious, and the world outside disappeared. Visibility dropped to perhaps 4 meters. The temperature, already brutal, felt as though it fell another 10 degrees in minutes as the wind stripped away any thin buffer of warmth that still lingered near the ground. In Oymyakon, blizzards were not disasters in the way they were elsewhere. They were events, yes, serious, demanding, requiring full attention, but the village had been surviving blizzards for as long as it had existed, which was centuries. Every home was built with this in mind. Thick walls, small windows, heavy doors, wood stores filled and ready, food put aside. The school called parents to confirm children had arrived safely, then locked its doors and prepared to keep the children warm and busy until the storm passed or parents came to retrieve them. Alexei's wife Nadia, a small and formidably competent woman of 58, had spent the morning in quiet, efficient storm preparation mode. The woodpile inside the covered porch was stacked 3 days' worth high. The kitchen held dried and smoked meats, frozen fish, bread she had baked the day before, root vegetables from the cellar. The second woodstove in the back room, their emergency stove, rarely used, was laid and ready to light if needed. She was making soup when he came in, stamping snow from his boots in the porch. The smell hit him like warmth made physical: beef broth, onion, the earthy depth of preserved vegetables. He stood in the doorway between the porch and the kitchen for a moment, just breathing it in. "Children all in?" Nadia asked without turning from the stove. School confirmed. Vera's grandchildren were last ones in, apparently. He hung his outer coat and unwound his scarf. "Old Semyon from the far end. I saw him heading toward the barn just as it hit. He should be all right. He's been through worse. Everyone here has been through worse." She ladled soup into a bowl and placed it on the table without ceremony. He sat. Outside, the wind screamed against the window glass with a sound like something trying to get in, a howling that in other places would have been terrifying, but here was simply weather. Simply winter. Simply Oymyakon announcing itself, as it did every year, with complete and total honesty about what it was. 3 p.m. Inside the storm. The afternoon hours were hours of stillness within chaos. The storm raged outside with no sign of tiring. The radio reported it would last well into the following morning, while inside the village's homes, life continued in its interior way. Alexei sat at the kitchen table, repairing a harness for one of the horses. The leather had to be kept warm while he worked. Cold leather became brittle and would crack, so he had brought it in the day before to let it soften. His hands moved through the work with the automatic ease of a man who had done this hundreds of times. Across from him, Nadia mended a coat. Between them, the woodstove ticked and breathed. They had lived this way for 35 years. Not in suffering, in this. In the particular texture of life built inside cold, the extraordinary interiority of it, the way extreme winters forced human beings back toward what was fundamental. Warmth, food, the company of those you loved, work that had meaning because it was necessary. People in cities sometimes asked Alexei's daughter Masha why her parents didn't move. Why anyone stayed in Oymyakon. How could they choose this? The question always puzzled Masha, not because it was unfair but because it assumed that comfort was the only measure of a life worth living. That ease was the point. She had tried, over the years, to explain what she had grown up inside, that there was a dignity in this life, a clarity, a deep sense of belonging to a place and a people and a way of being that did not exist in city apartments with central heating and supermarkets open 24 hours. That her parents were not surviving their lives but living them, fully, with knowledge of exactly what that required. The harness took shape under Alexei's hands. The stove burned. Outside, the blizzard howled at -55, -58, the wind driving the cold into something that no number could truly communicate, that had to be felt in the bones and the lungs and the face to be understood. 6 p.m. Community in cold. When storms came, people in Oymyakon checked on each other. Not through phones. Though phones were used, but in person when possible, and in the old Yakut tradition of knowing your neighbors not as strangers behind walls but as the people upon whom your survival, at some point, might genuinely depend. This interdependence was not a metaphor here. It was material and real. In a place this cold, isolation was danger. Community was warmth in the most literal sense. Alexei, during a brief lull in the wind at around 6 in the evening, crossed the lane to old Vera's house. He carried a pot of Nadia's soup wrapped in insulation. The journey took less than 2 minutes. He did not waste those 2 minutes on anything but moving. Vera met him at the door, already expecting him the way people in small places expect things, through the pattern of years. She accepted the soup with a grunt that in any other culture might have seemed rude but here was straightforwardly grateful. Her woodstove was burning well. Her pipes were fine. She had food, warmth, everything needed. My grandson called from Moscow, she said, handing back the empty container from the soup he had brought 2 days before. Worried about me. Good boy. He wanted me to come stay in Moscow. Every winter he asks. She made a sound deep in her chest. Moscow. As if the word itself contained its own absurdity. Alexei smiled inside his scarf. What did you tell him? What I always tell him. That I am fine. That I was born here. That I will die here. She paused. And that if I went to Moscow I would die from the other kind of cold. He understood exactly what she meant. 11:30 p.m. Night in the blizzard. By midnight the storm had, if anything, deepened. Alexei lay awake in the darkness, listening. The sounds of a blizzard at night in Oymyakon were a specific symphony, the high, thin scream of wind at the peak of its force, the lower moan as it dropped briefly, the percussion of snow crystals hard as glass beads against the window, and beneath all of it, the steady creak of the house itself, settling and shifting in the cold the way old houses did, as if the building were breathing. The woodstove in the next room popped softly, burning through the night as it always did, maintaining the thin line between their interior warmth and the annihilating cold outside. Nadia slept beside him, warm and solid and deeply asleep the way only people who have worked physically demanding days can sleep. Her breathing was steady. He lay still, not wanting to wake her, and he thought about the nature of this place and this life. 61 years. He had lived 61 years in a place that the world outside sometimes described as uninhabitable. The word always struck him as both wrong and, in a strange way, right. Wrong because people did inhabit it, had inhabited it for thousands of years, the Yakut people building a civilization inside conditions that seemed designed to refuse civilization. Right because the word captured something true, that this place demanded constant negotiation, constant respect, constant attention. You could not sleepwalk through life in Oymyakon. It would not allow it. And perhaps that was, in the end, a kind of gift. He thought of his daughter in Yakutsk, warm in her apartment. He thought of his father, long dead, who had taught him that panic was the true enemy. He thought of old Vera, who had called Moscow cold in the way that mattered, cold with anonymity, cold with distance from the people and place that made you who you were. He was not a man given to philosophy. But in the deep dark of a blizzard night, in the oldest inhabited cold place on earth, it was difficult not to feel that something essential was present here that was absent in easier places. A truth about human endurance. About the relationship between hardship and meaning. About what it meant to stay. 5 a.m. After. The blizzard broke toward dawn. Not with drama. It simply stopped, the way extreme things sometimes stop, without announcement. Alexei woke to a silence so complete it was its own sound. He lay for a moment, orienting himself in it. Then he got up. He dressed. He went outside. The village lay under fresh white, impossibly deep, perfectly still. The sky to the east had that particular shade of pre-dawn blue that existed only in places of extreme cold. Not blue exactly, but the color of cold itself made visible, a blue that was almost purple, vast and clear and merciless and beautiful. Stars burned in it like holes cut through to something bright behind. His breath froze instantly. His eyelashes crystallized. He stood on the step of his house in -56°C and looked at the village, at the smoke beginning to rise from other chimneys as other people woke and added wood to their stoves, at the frozen world laid out before him in the silence after storm. Down the lane, old Vera's door opened and she emerged, wrapped in furs, to begin the morning ritual of breaking ice from the water barrel. Above the village, the cold sky brightened. Another day in Oymyakon had begun. Oymyakon, which means unfrozen water, in the Yakut language, a reference to a nearby spring, has been inhabited for centuries. Despite its extreme conditions, its community persists, a living testament to human adaptability and the depth of what people will endure to remain in the place they call home.